I listed down 5 Python features you should implement to improve your workflow significantly. These are not over-the-top difficult things to learn, but they'll make your life a little bit easier. They're really simple, and without any further ado, let's dive into the list. First off, we have fstrings. Before fstrings, you probably would have used string concatenation or % formatting, but they're inconvenient, hard to read, and difficult to keep track of. Now let's look at fstrings, or properly called as formatted string literals. Let's see how to use it. Here, for example, we have a name variable, which is a string, and an integer age variable. So to write an fstring, we precede the string with an upper or lowercase f, and the variables or expressions can be wrapped inside curly braces. So we can do message equals curly braces for the name is curly braces for age, years old, then curly braces again for an expression. So we can write can vote if age greater than equal to 18, else cannot vote. Notice how we wrap these inner strings in double quotes instead of single. Since this particular string uses single quotes, we have to use double quotes inside throughout, and vice versa. Now this is convenient, makes it easy to read and form strings. Moving on, the next one is unpacking. Here we have an iterator, a tuple of values, and if you know Python, you must surely know that here, since we have 3 elements, we can assign variables to each element like this. A, B, C equals that tuple, so we can use them individually. This is unpacking in the simplest form. Along with this, we can use an asterisk called the unpacking or the packing operator. Here we have a long list of items and we are unsure of the length, and we need the first 2 and the last elements, for example. So we can just do A, B, asterisk C, D equals list. The unpacking occurs in sequence AB, gets the first 2 elements, remaining except the last are packed in C, and the last element is in D. Another usage for this is as a function argument. Here we have a product function which multiplies all the provided parameters. We can start off with 2 parameters, A, B, but what happens when you pass in 4 parameters? We have to write A, B, C, D, and so on, which is not that intuitive. Here we can use that asterisk and type numbers. So what it does is creates a tuple of all the parameters that have been passed. So we can return the product here. Let's call product with some random values, and there's it. That is packing in a nutshell. Pretty useful. The third one in the list is argparse. This is going to be extremely useful for people who write a lot of scripts, myself included. Argparse basically handles the passing of parameters we provide while running the script from a shell. Look at npm for example. We pass in the install or the -i argument flag to the npm script and then type out the name of the package. And that's how it takes the input for package name. Argparse in Python handles this exact same thing for you. Here I have a script which lists out the Formula 1 driver standings. If I run it, I'll get the entire list of 20 drivers. But if I only want the top 5, I can write top 5 and we get first 5 only. Pretty cool, right? Let's see how to implement it. As you can see here, I have a function which loops through the dictionary written by some other function that calls an API. That function takes in the limit and modifies the URL query. So now what we have to do is use argparse to provide that limit value from the terminal itself. So first we have to import argparse, then define a parser object. We can provide a simple description of the program here, and now we have to add an argument. The name is preceded by 1 or more dashes. We can have alternatives as well. Let's add a simple help description. The default value here, if we don't provide a value, it will use a default value to call the function like we saw before. And then we call the parse args method to get a namespace object. We can just access the values with the argument name, which will pass to that function. Let's try it out. And it works just the way we want it. That is it. There are a lot more features to this package, so I'll link the docs in the description. Now coming to the fourth one, let's look at Python interactive mode. Everyone who has used Python at least once knows that one of the ways to use Python is through the shell. You can just type Python in terminal and you code in it. Pretty straightforward. Now generally, people write code in an editor, then just run it through terminal. Sometimes while debugging and testing, you might have to test specific functions individually. And that's where Python's interactive mode comes into play. So here we have a basic program with 2 functions, some global variables as well. So now in the terminal, add -i flag before the file name. By default, it will run the script first since I'm calling this function in the script itself. But here, as you can see, the program is still active. We can get the values of variables from here itself to see how they work and call functions as well. Calling this function should update that variable, and yes, it did get updated. You get the gist of this mode. This is very useful indeed. Now let's come to the final point. Let's talk about enumerate. Enumerate essentially provides a counter for the values in an iterable. Here we have a list of random numbers. In the traditional way, we loop over the list with range, for example, and we access the elements with its indices. But enumerate does it better. The syntax is straightforward. For each iteration, enumerate returns a tuple. The first element is the counter and the second element is the value from that retrieval. So we'll just loop over it and unpack both the variables from that tuple, and we can now do whatever we want. Now we can just print the values and you can see how useful enumerate is. What if you don't want the counter to start at 0? So we can just mention the start value here and that's it. This makes accessing values easier and you get a handy counter to do whatever you want. That concludes the list of 5 Python features you should use in your workflow.